Hey everybody, this is DNAX, Potomac Riverkeeper with Potomac Riverkeeper Network. We have Mark Frondorf, our Shenandoah Riverkeeper, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk about recreational use in the river and how a lot of the issues that we work on tie into protecting recreational use. And I was going to turn it over to Mark so he could show his presentation on his smallmouth bass assessment.
So I see on here we have Thomas O'Connell, and Thomas is the director of the Eastern Ecological Science Center, where we had the smallmouth bass health assessment, and we brought in the fisheries biologists from Virginia, from Maryland, from West Virginia, and from Pennsylvania as well, all looking at the various major rivers. And in a nutshell, it was really positive news. Smallmouth bass are incredibly resilient, and all of the rivers really have shown a pronounced bump up in terms of population and the quality of the fish. There have not been any significant fish kills in the last couple of years. We're getting ready to, I'm doing the final edits on the summary report, and then that will be posted on our webpage along with the slides that all of the presenters gave at the symposium. And that includes Dr. Vicki Blazer with USGS and Heather Walsh and God, I'm going brain dead on two other people that gave excellent presentations. So anyway, all of those slides are going to be presented there. And in terms of some of the resources that I really encourage people to use and to access on the river, and talking about just river conditions. For me, I always want to go to. Yeah, I'm just going to try to do a share. Okay, so this is the USGS river gauge here in Front Royal, Virginia. And I always encourage people, when you go out on the river, be it if you're fishing or if you're paddling, to always go to the closest river gauge and make a point of seeing what its actual height is, as well as the cubic feet per second, because you can have a small variation in the gauge height, but it will have a significant bump up or decrease in the cubic feet per second, which is really just the volume. And so I really encourage people that when you go out, to take a look out, what's the river doing here in Front Royal, and you see back on June 1st, we had that big plug of water come through, and now it's already dropping back down and in is good shape. And when you're out there on the river and you see that the river is 3.2 at the Front Royal gauge, and it was a perfect height for you, write that down. That's important. Write it down. And then so when you and your friends are wanting to go back out on the river, in a month, and they're like, is the river high? Is the river low? And it's like, well, we had 3.2 and we had perfect conditions, and it's 3.3. And so it's just really beneficial to be a little bit proactive and capture your notes and capture your findings on things. I'm just trying to see if I can't get um, okay, wait, one other one. Oh yeah, just have to get rid of the um, the gauge. And here is, like South Fork of Luray, for example. Today, right now, it's at 3 feet, and it's 1,000, 90 CFS, and at 3.1. But if I go back over here we are at 3.87, you know, 9 inches increase in water, but the CFS is effectively doubled in size. So you're facing a much stronger river out there when you have the volume go from 1,000 to almost 2,000 CFS. So the USGS gauges, the NOAA gauges, they're all definitely worth going and checking out. And the other little plug that I want to put in is we have the Shenandoah Swim Guide that Alan Lehman, and who's our program manager, and Jeff Kelby did a lot of the heavy lifting. And you can go on the swim guide, and you can just, scroll down and see where it is that you're interested in going. And here's Grove Hill Landing, and it gives you the address, it gives you the location, it tells you, the Newport Landing's 5.5 miles downstream, any rapids that you may encounter, and just a wealth of information that's there. Avoid floating and boating when the river's over 4 feet at the Luray gauge. And so there's just an abundance of information, and I really encourage people to go out and to use that. So I think I'll stop there and let Dean jump in. But anyway, USGS, NOAA gauges, Shenandoah Swim Guide, all really good tools for everybody, whether you're interested in paddling or fishing or just getting out and just recreating and even swimming for that matter.
Yeah. So thanks, Mark. Yeah, as a river keeper, I'm always checking my river gauges. As a river user, I'm always checking my river gauges. And the one thing, when you're a river keeper and you've done this long enough, you always get the question, what's the state of the river? How's the river doing? And that's a really tough question to answer sometimes. It depends on location and other things. But before I get into speaking of that, I just think it's important to recognize that what is amazing about Potomac Riverkeeper Network is that we do have three river keepers that operate throughout the entire 14,700 square mile watershed. And Mark, the work that Mark is doing up in the Shenandoah and the work that Brent Walls is doing in the Upper Potomac is often very different than the work I'm doing downstream. But it's important for us as river keepers to know some of the issues and some of the threats and things that are happening in other parts of the watershed that are uniquely different. And I'll talk about that in a second. But as far as the Potomac, and I'm speaking more on the Potomac, but certainly the river as a whole, Lyndon Johnson declared the river a national disgrace, the Potomac River, back in 1965. But he also said it was a model for, recreation, and or it should be. And I definitely agree with that. And so we've made a lot of improvements. I think it's worth mentioning, that we've eliminated a lot of the most egregious, industrial discharges. We've made a lot of improvements with sewage treatment plants. Now, as an organization, we're constantly finding, new failing sewage plants, but as a whole, a lot of these sewage plants have upgraded significantly part of the Bay program and put in advanced nutrient removal in the sewage systems. And it's made a lot of improvements to water quality. We don't see, at least in the main stem of the Potomac, a lot of the large, algal blooms, the blue-green algae blooms, mats of algae that we used to see back in the 60s and 50s and early 70s. There's still some issues that Mark can speak to upriver in the Shenandoah, but we've definitely made some improvements, and the river, has been coming back, and it's you can see that if you get out on it enough, the amount of recreation, like around Harper's Ferry, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of people tubing, rafting, kayaking there. It's an amazing thing. And then downriver here, and we see a lot of boating right in DC. There's definitely risks and threats, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But then you go downriver, and it's just absolutely Colonial Beach and areas downriver, Fairview Beach, just lots of boaters and recreation, lots of people swimming. I swim in the river every year. When people do use the river, we want them to do it safely. And so, but there are, so there have been a lot of improvements. This is why we do River Palooza. If you're not familiar with that, we have some special paddle trips we usually do every year. And go to our website and check that out. But we have some amazing tubing trips and rafting trips in the Shenandoah and the Potomac up near Harper's Ferry this summer. We have our Mallows Bay paddle downriver. So some great opportunities to get on the water and recreate. And we're always trying to encourage people to use the river and do it safely. I think it is worth mentioning, when we talk about how's the river doing, right? There are some emerging issues and threats. And to me, I'm going to list four big ones. Ag pollution runoff, which Mark deals a lot with, primarily, mostly. Downriver, where I'm at, urban stormwater pollution. right? That's a huge. These are two of the growing sources of pollution. While we've made some cuts in other sources of pollution, like wastewater treatment plants, these are growing sources of pollution because we have growing population. We have growing agriculture, at least with concentrated animal feeding operation and cattle herds. Some of the things that really concern me are the issue of microplastics, and then obviously this new forever chemicals, PFAS, right? These are all these emerging issues. And if you look at like, well, where is some of this coming from? I mean, a lot of the microplastic issues are directly tied to urban stormwater runoff, like these roads and parking lots are sources of microplastics that's washing from streets into our river, into our streams, through storm drains, and then gets into our rivers, and then they start breaking down. They get into wetlands, and and start breaking down these microplastics. Now we're starting to see microplastics in every aspect of the food chain, right? It's in our the food we eat, it's in the fish we eat, it's in our brains, it's in our bloodstream, and it's a real concern. And the same goes with PFAS. And there's a lot of linkages with PFAS contamination. It's ubiquitous. There's a lot of sources of PFAS that are coming from certainly from sewage treatment plants, but agriculture is definitely a big linkage or connector to PFAS, particularly biosolids. And we've been working on this issue, and we're happy to answer questions about that. But in general, I think really what we try to do as an organization is just to educate people about how to use the river safely. So for example, if you're Mark mentioned Swim Guide and some of the data that goes up, we have a very robust water quality monitoring program in the lower Potomac. Well, Brent has one in the upper Potomac, but we also have a lab, a trained, 100 trained volunteers that are out there every week from May through October collecting data. And we're posting it to Swim Guide to let people know every week when it's safe to use the river, when it's not. In DC, in this area, we have these combined sewer systems that are still discharging stormwater and sewage during rain events. But we also have during rain events urban stormwater runoff, and this combined, pollution, is contributing to these higher bacterial loads or E. coli. And so that was the main focus of our water quality monitoring program, is to get out there and start sampling for E. coli. So when we post this data on Fridays, people know going into the weekend where it's safe to swim, where it's not, right? And Mark has some significant issues with harmful algal blooms up on parts of the Shenandoah, and he can talk about that. That's still an issue linked to agriculture, but down here, it's more from urban stormwater pollution, and certainly these combined sewer systems. And so we do our best. We Swim Guide, at least in just the DC area alone, we've had over 50,000 DMV residents go to Swim Guide. And I'm very proud because, quite frankly, I feel like this is something local government should be providing to river users. And we're the ones that are stepping up free of charge, providing this service, letting people know when it's safe to recreational swim, when it's safe not to swim, and where are those locations like Rock Creek, which is always having problems with a lot of high bacterial loads or high E. coli. Um, Lastly, I'm going to just talk about fishing and fish consumption advisories. I think it's really, really important that people, if you are, if you're a recreational catch and release angler, that's fine. I know you tend not to worry about this issue as much, but there are a lot of people that still eat fish that are subsistence fishing. And I think it's important to check fish consumption advisories. We've done our best to try and post some of that information on our website, but they're changing regularly. For example, it was Potomac Riverkeeper Network and kind of our push to get the Maryland Department of Environment in 2023 to update fish consumption advisories for PFAS, right? These forever chemicals that are showing up, particularly downstream from military bases, right? These are some of the hot spots where we're seeing. I live on Piscataway Creek. It's one of the most polluted streams, at least the fish contaminated in that stream are some of the highest levels we see in the entire state of Maryland, right? And I know that there's people there that are eating these fish bringing that fish home and feeding it to their families. And that's a real concern of ours. That's one of the things that we're working on as an organization, not only trying to deal with the contamination, which in this case is from Andrews Air Force Base, but also try to push to get fish consumption advisories posted. But Maryland just updated fish consumption advisories for um, PFAS in some of these tributaries of the Potomac River, but the state of Virginia has not. Right? I know they're working on it in some places, but the reality is that state of Virginia is lagging behind, and they have not updated their fish consumption advisories and let the people know, even though they have data that shows alarming levels of PFAS in some locations in the fish that they have tested, and certainly in the waters that they've tested. And a lot of that is information isn't often publicly available or readily knowledge, available for people to find and use. And so we try to do our best just to educate and inform people. And I will just say, and like I just posted to my a blog to Potomac Riverkeeper Facebook page today about oysters down in the St. Mary's River. Right, the state does develop uses this criteria: surface water recreational exposure risk. Right, and so we make sure that that this is often updated and provided to the public, and so that information is available. But the last thing I just want to say is we don't want to discourage people from using the river. Right? We want people to use the river, and when I was working on coal ash, I had a lot of people ask me, "Oh, I'm not going to go in the river because I'm concerned about coal ash pollution." And things like microplastics and heavy metals, those are not issues that I would be concerned about when it comes to swimming. Right, you're not going to absorb that through your skin as readily. It's not a major public health risk to swimming, but it is when you talk about eating fish. And so making sure we're you know just being clear about where the risks are and the threats to the public. And so at this point, I just wanted to open this up. If people want to start asking questions, we could dig into some of this. We wanted to have more of a dialogue. Mark might have some things he might want to add too.
Yeah, Dean, I just want to jump in just a little bit on fish consumption advisories. Here on the Shenandoah watershed, way up on the South River, which is the largest tributary to the South Fork of the Shenandoah, you have a DuPont chemical plant in Waynesboro, Virginia, and they used mercury from 1929 until 1950. And then in 1950, they changed their manufacturing process and they stopped using mercury. And all the mercury is supposed to be captured in a retort facility, and none of it was supposed to get into the water, the ground, or anywhere else. And then in the 1970s, they started expansion and they found the presence of mercury, and they looked at it, said it's going to go away, and it would sort of go away, and then a high water event would just agitate the soil and reintroduce mercury into the river. Long story short, here we are 75 years later, and there's still a fish consumption advisory for mercury on the South River and on the South Fork of the Shenandoah and the main stem. And for the South Fork of the Shenandoah, the suggestion is that you're allowed to consume 2 meals per month unless you're pregnant, you wish to become pregnant, you have autoimmune issues, you have this or you have that. And West Virginia is not exactly known for being the bastion of good environmental law. But when you go from on the main stem of the Shenandoah, from Virginia to West Virginia, and you look at their fish consumption advisory, they're even more stringent of 1 meal per month in the from the river for smallmouth bass because of mercury concerns that have spanned for the last 75 years. And so I am concerned about people that are subsistence fishing, and we have a fairly large group of folks, Latino folks who will come out and they enjoy the river, and I really think that some of our visitors and residents, they're not aware of these mercury fish consumption advisories, and they're eating far more, and their family is eating more than what they should be. And so just today, Alan and I were out on the river putting in our xylem buoy, and um, by pure happenstance, one of the conservation police officers stopped by, and he was just checking licenses, and I got into a conversation with him, talking with him about how we need to be doing more, and we need to be printing sort of bilingual postcard size little information sheets to hand out to folks that when they go to a lot of the campgrounds dotting the South Fork of the Shenandoah, that they're made aware and that they're alerted to the fact that um, there is still a fish consumption advisory on that. And so I just wanted to put that out to people. We're also concerned about harmful algal blooms. I mean, we've had a very cool spring. And so what, water temperatures have stayed in the 50s and 60s. They punched above 70 for like a cup of coffee and then went back down. But we had very warm or warm air temperatures yesterday. And so I think in the next few weeks, we're going to start seeing, more algal mats and algal blooms out there. And a lot of those simply come from just the amount of agriculture that exists out here in the river system. As a crow flies 125 miles, we drain 3,000 square miles, but in that area, there are 165 million chickens, 18 million turkey, 500,000 head of cattle, and all of that manure, all of that poultry litter has to go someplace. And when it's put on land where there's an agronomic need for it, it's wonderful. It's an inexpensive fertilizer. But when it's just simply dumped on land, it just becomes a convenient waste disposal system. And especially with phosphorus, not to get super wonky on chemistry, once the soil is saturated, it can no longer hold on to the phosphorus. So when it rains, it just flushes into the river, into the creeks, and helps kickstart a lot of these algal blooms. And so I just wanted to sort of just touch, upon that. But I completely agree with Dean. We have these concerns that are out there, and we want people to be aware of them and be able to make informed decisions about what they want to do with themselves and their family. But personally, I'm also is equally, if not more, concerned about just people just getting into the river completely unaware, thinking that it's just a water slide at Disneyland or something. They need to be much more aware of river conditions. Just yesterday on Compton Rapids, there was a person in a canoe, and it turned into a pretty significant water rescue, and it was a good news scenario, and that they were in fact rescued. And so that is a good thing. And a few weeks back, there was a story in an instance where a woman drowned, and it's very, very sad, and it bothers lots of people. And she was not wearing a PFD. And so if you're out in the river, I strongly encourage people, especially if you're paddling new water and you're unfamiliar with it, or you have kids or whatever, make certain that you wear your PFD, your personal flotation device, and just do the right thing. And that way, if you have an unexpected capsizing, it just becomes a refreshing dip in the water, and it's doesn't turn into any kind of crisis. So I think that's about it for right now.
Do you have any questions? I see one, I think.
There's one in the Q&A if you'd like me to read it.
Sure.
Sure.
It says the Chesapeake Bay Magazine was just covering the failure of the Bay states to meet the 2025 deadline, largely due to failure to make reductions in areas of stormwater and agricultural runoff. In addition to harming water quality and river functions, are there also threats to human health that we should be considered about?
Mark, why don't you take the ag
Sure.
part?
Yeah. Going back to, the cattle herds in the river and fish consumption advisories, bacteria, E. coli, when cattle enter the river, it's a trifecta of bad things. They rip up the stream bank, increase the sediment load, they defecate in the river, increasing the bacteria, as well as adding to the nitrogen and the phosphorus. And so bacterias, are a concern. Bacterial levels are a concern. And harmful algal blooms, they're a potential concern. I strongly encourage people that if you come to the river and all of a sudden you look out and there's a large algal mat and it kind of smells of ammonia, it looks a little scuzzy, trust your spidey senses, go someplace else. Um, uh, there are other areas further upstream or downstream where you are going to have um, better river conditions. And so I would encourage people to do that with on the Shenandoah with bacteria and E. coli. One of our sister organizations out here, Friends of the Shenandoah River, they test for bacteria during the regular paddling season. And I think that they test at 15 different locations. And Karen Anderson, they do a very good job of testing out here. But I also encourage people to realize that out here, especially out here where they're not the testing areas are not as frequent, that it's a snapshot in time. It's how the river was 2 days ago. And if you didn't have a high water event, a heavy rain, and if it was deemed to be safe 2 days ago, it's probably going to be good 2 days later. But more importantly, I would look at the results at these locations over time. Case in point is up here at Hawksbill Creek in Luray, Virginia. It's tested hot for all of last year except for 1 week, and so far this year it's tested hot. And so if someone asks me, should we be swimming and recreating and wading in Hawksbill Creek? My answer is no. And so it's important to look at not just this week's results, but look at it over time because if it's continuously hot, there's something directly upstream that is making it so, and it's likely going to be hot in the future.
Yeah, and the same goes with urban stormwater pollution. That's why I had mentioned, that some of the bigger emerging threats and continued threats to the river is ag runoff, ag pollution, and urban stormwater runoff. I'm sure you all heard about Robert F. Kennedy swimming in Rock Creek. In addition to combined sewer systems and broken sewer pipes, which we tend to see in urban streams, there's just a lot of urban runoff when it rains. Stuff like pet waste and other sources of bacteria flush off into the stream, and a smaller water body like that, the bacteria loads tend to be higher, the E. coli levels, and so it does pose a risk to public safety and health. And so the data that we have, as Mark said, is only so useful, and there's gaps in that data. I think a real rule of thumb before we actually started doing a lot of the testing was I would just have to tell people stay out of the river 48 hours after it rains. And I've seen that here in DC, like after a big rain event, we'll get a big thunderstorm in the summer, like on a Wednesday night, and then it's nice and sunny on Thursday, and people are out in droves in the river, and that's when you can have really high levels of bacteria, and it looks beautiful out, and not realize that there's a threat. But at the same time, in terms of how it affects the bay, all that runoff, that pollution, moves downriver. And down in the lower Potomac, we have like a 50-mile dead zone of low dissolved oxygen in the lower end of the Potomac River. And that, just contributes to the ongoing water quality problems that we see in the Chesapeake Bay. And it's not unique to the Bay. I'm sure you all probably have heard about the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. That's 7,000 square miles. Some of the red tides we're seeing in Florida. Nutrient pollution is a major threat to water quality in the Bay and to our rivers for a variety of reasons. And like as Mark said, it's a transport when we have rain of pollution to run off like on sediment particles. Phosphorus loves to transport on sediment and hitch a ride, and bacteria loads also too are E. coli moving and transporting into our waterways where people are recreating. So it is a threat to public health, and it's definitely an ongoing threat to making improvements in water quality, both in the rivers and the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Thank you both for your input. We do have a few more questions, so I'm going to go ahead and read them off.
Sure.
We've got about four more. So the next one says, May was such a wet month, and the Potomac got very high and wild, but I heard the Shenandoah did not rise so much. Is that normal? Are there reasons for this?
Yeah. So It really just depends upon where the front is coming from and where it originates. A lot of the Potomac got hammered either by systems coming in from the west, west to east, or staying off the coast until it got to the mid-Atlantic and would come inward, and it never really got up into the Shenandoah Valley watershed. But then there are times when during hurricane season, say September, October, where a storm system will just come up from the south to the north in the same direction that the Potomac or the Shenandoah runs, and we've gotten hammered, and and the Potomac is really sort of largely escaped, unscathed, and so it really is just somewhat dependent upon where these systems are blowing in from.
Yeah, and I'll just say further up in the Shenandoah, things are going to be a little flashier. You'll get spikes and they drop off quicker the farther you get downriver. Some of that sustained levels tend to take longer to drop down. But as Mark said, right in the beginning, checking your stream gauges. If y'all remember, if you're from the DC area in 2021, we had a big rain event, but it was more a remnant hurricane that was pushing water. We had these huge tidal surges in October of 2021. These were some of the highest high tides that we've seen in the DC area and in Alexandria. But when I looked at the stream gauge, the Little Falls stream gauge right at Chain Bridge is the last like river gauge with current. And that's the one I look at a lot. And it wasn't even that high. So even though we had rain, a lot of people are thinking there was a lot of rain upriver that was coming down, causing this flooding. The reality is it was a system that was pushing water upriver. And so that's why looking at these stream gauges and trying to look at some of the projections for those stream gauges is important, particularly if you're going to get out on the river.
All right, great. Thank you both so much. The next question reads, question for both Mark and Dean. What are your favorite spots to recreate in the rivers and what do you do there? Swim, fish, kayak?
Go ahead, Mark.
Sure. Okay. Everybody grab a pen and paper. I'm going to tell you my absolute secret favorite fishing spot. Just kidding. So,
He
um,
won't do
won't do it. So
it.
for me, I love to fish. I'm a fish head. I've guided on the Shenandoah and on the Potomac for just about 30 years. And I love fishing. I love fishing rivers because every time you go out, you're fishing a different river. It could be, um, it could be bolder, it could be quieter, it could be dirty or it could be cleaner. And so every time that you go out, you are fishing in a different river, and you always learn something new. Um, in general, I mean, my bread and butter stretch when I'm out fishing on the Potomac or the Shenandoah, I love the Harpers Ferry stretch. I love above Dam 3 down to Brunswick. I love on the Shenandoah, Millville, down to Harpers Ferry. It doesn't get much pressure, but it's also a much bigger, steeper gradient, bolder section of water. And so you're not going to be out there, fishing, out of a canoe. But then on the South Fork, I mean, Bentonville, and there's all the outfitters, Downriver Canoe, Front Royal Outdoors. They all have just a million different stretches that are absolutely perfect for fishing for smallmouth bass. And then it's also fun just to run like Compton Rapids out here on the South Fork. That's always, kind of exciting. But for me, it's fishing and then kayaking, and it's I just like it's a dynamic environment. It changes every day. Rivers change every day. And you just learn.
Mark, I kind of have a follow-up for that I saw on Facebook, and I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Would you prefer to give up your secret spot or your secret bait if you had to?
Oh, I would give up my secret bait instead of a secret spot. You can give somebody a handful of your secret baits, and if they don't know how to fish it properly, they're not going to catch fish. It's you need to learn technique, and technique is more important than secret baits. So
And Mark is a fishing guy. by the way. So um, I'll tell you my favorite fishing spot, but I don't fish as much as Mark. I just go shad fishing usually once a year, and I go up Fletcher's Cove, Chain Bridge, very popular fishing spot. I love it. It usually early April every year, and it's just wonderful. It's a great spot. But as far as recreation, I do more of that, And I'll say I got a lot of favorite spots. Paw Paw Bends in the Upper Potomac, beautiful spot. Nice, perfect for an overnight camp, paddle trip if you want to do a couple days on the river. Harper's Ferry is just a special, beautiful place. And that's why we do and I encourage everybody on here to join us for our River Palooza. It's the weekend before Labor Day weekend, our summer blowout and our tubing trip. We do 2 days in the Harper's Ferry area, one on the Shenandoah, one on the Potomac. It's really fun and amazing. But then Mather Gorge below Great Falls, that's down to uh, Lock 10 is one of my favorite stretches on the entire Potomac River. But then, there's tidal sections down near Wade's Bay, Mallows Bay, below Mallows Bay. Just a beautiful stretch of river for boating. And then down below Colonial Beach, Shark's Tooth Island, one of my favorite places on the entire Potomac. And this river has it all. It's just absolutely stunning and amazing, and has an amazing fishery, and also just tremendous opportunities for paddling of every level that you want to do.
All right, thank you both. So the next question is, I have also heard that when you see bubbles and foam in the river that looks like soap, it's not necessarily due to agricultural runoff and might not be a bad thing. Is this true?
Yeah, so sometimes you'll see, well, it's two things. One is oftentimes you'll see foam lines in the river, and they're naturally sort of occurring, and it's just an indication of where separate water currents come together, and they bring sort of a bubble line together. But when you see like just sort of bubbles free floating in the water, it could be that it's coming from a wastewater treatment plant that is flushing some of its tanks, and so you're seeing some surfactants that are in the river, and they're allowed to do that, according to their permit. But oftentimes in the fall, you'll see foam build up, and that's just naturally occurring due to decomposition of biomass of leaf material. And as that material breaks down, it's going to release oxygen, and it is it's going to produce some foam lines and bubbles, and that's simply a naturally occurring event. So just because I saw bubbles in the water, I wouldn't necessarily think that, oh my God, there's some kind of illicit discharge, unless I saw petroleum sheen or something like that that would suggest something else.
Yeah, I will add to that, again, as river keepers, we're always learning with new information, new data. But we are learning that in some cases, some of the foam that we're seeing is linked to PFAS. Whether it's pesticides residues are to stick onto plants, right, to hold on. Those residues, those surfactants, in some cases are showing up. PFAS laden foam is showing up in certain locations, and so the only way you can really tell is test for it. But we've heard about testing in certain places like Michigan. I just saw a recent report about foam on the beaches of North Carolina, where they tested and found some kind of alarming levels of PFAS in that foam. So it really just needs to be tested, and that's why everything we do, we try to ground truth through science and monitoring and real data, not assumptions and old information. We're always trying to figure out what is the most recent data, where can we get more data, and if we need to, that's why we do our own investigations. We do our own sampling if we feel it's linked to a certain pollution source.
All right, thank you. So we do have about five more questions. So if we could just be a bit brief with the responses, as much as I appreciate the details. All right, so the next question reads, is there a way to curtail the motorboat speeds on the narrower places on the river? We have about a mile of frontage across from the Dickerson power plant. We continue to lose large trees along the riverbank because of speeding motorboat waves. Otherwise, we are a depositional area.
I will just say I don't really know what you could do about. I mean, obviously, unless there's a no wake zone that's put in there by the state, I think it's kind of open to motorboaters using it. I don't know the volume of motorboating activity in that particular stretch of river, but um, I suspect it's not too much, and I don't know how much. I don't know if that's the only thing that's contributing to some of the issues you're talking about. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you. Next question reads, do either of you have experience using smartphone apps that are meant to indicate water quality of bodies of water used for recreational purposes? Given the data gaps, are these reliable? If so, is there an app either of you recommend?
Swim Guide. That's the one we use. I would definitely encourage you to use that. But there may be other ones that Mark, particularly for fishing, Mark might want to talk about.
Yeah, we were using Water Reporter with Chesapeake Commons, now the Commons, but they decided that they wanted to go in a different direction. The Water Reporter allowed us to have folks submit um, pollution concerns to us, and it would automatically capture the sort of the Latin long GPS location and details, but that is no longer up and running. And so I'm sure there may be some other fishing apps out there. I don't really use them, and so I can't talk knowledgeably about them. If I'm going out and fishing new water, I'm looking more about USGS gauges and things of that nature.
All right, thank you. The next question is, what kind of resources are available in terms of bilingual aid for other communities visiting these places for recreation? And if there are some type of digital aid they can check that is pointed out in the recreation sites? Just curious. And I guess I actually could say something if
Go ahead,
Definitely.
Ashley.
Yeah.
so we post all of our swim guide or water quality monitoring testing results on our social media. And I myself am bilingual. I'm a Spanish speaker, so I have taken it upon myself to also include the information in Spanish. So that way it's easily understandable and legible for the Spanish speaking community. If either of you wanted to add on to that.
No.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just more needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
But it's a good first step.
that's the perfect response. Absolutely.
All right. The next question is, a friend of a friend is into something called microfishing, which sounds like a joke, but I Googled it and it's real. People fishing for tiny species like minnows. Have either of you heard of this? Do you run into this on your river watches? My next question would be, why? Just for sport? Because you're more likely to catch something?
Yeah, I am aware of microfishing. I've never done it. It just requires um, very light line, 1 pound line, 2 pound line, and everything is just completely downsized. Um, it's not my cup of tea, I guess, but I am aware of it and people do it. You'll find it a lot also when people are ice fishing. They will scale way down on their lure sizes and will use much smaller everything. And then, why they do it, um, just for sport. It was, and I see in the question, quite possibly. It's completely different. I mean, if you're down on the lower Potomac and you're fishing for blue cats and you catch something under 10 pounds, you're like, oh, it's a small one. And when you're microfishing, I mean, if you're catching, 3, 4, 5 inch fish, you're ecstatic. A sort of variation of that is it's a fly rod called a tenkara, and you don't have a spool. It's probably like the modern day equivalent of having a bamboo pole, and you just downsize everything, and you're using it a lot to go for trout fishing. But it's definitely a thing. I think it's definitely sort of a niche area in the fishing community.
Thanks, Mark. Next question is it safe to kayak on a river that's still brown from rain runoff when you can't see the boulders that might be in front of you and just under the water? In other words, do you need clear water for safe kayaking?
I think if you have to ask, then it might not be very safe, to be honest with you. If you're, very comfortable with your skill level and you know the river, and you've checked your stream gauges and you're wearing your PFD, then you could probably do it. But, again, I think it just depends on a lot of factors. And so I'm not comfortable just telling people to go out and do it, particularly if you haven't run that stretch at lower levels and know where some of the hazards are and understand some of the risk and have a lot of experience.
Yeah. The other thing is too, is that when the river rises or falls, you will have ledges appear and disappear. There may be a whole ledge that's out of the water during low water. And then when the river increases, all of a sudden those become a little bit more of a risk. I would, um, just try to get on water where you're comfortable paddling and perfect your technique and perfect your skills so that if you do unexpectedly hit a boulder, you know how to slide off of it, you know how to eddy out, from an impact, things of that nature. Um, and then with the water being brown, it could just simply be sediment, or if you're concerned about, getting in something that has a high bacteria count, that's something different. But I'm just talking about river safety and being out there and being able to safely navigate a stretch of water. The other thing that I would do too, and encourage people to do when you're out there, two things. One is to dress for the water temperature, not the air temperature, dress for the water temperature. So if you do take an unexpected plunge in very cold water, you're not wearing cotton, you have on fleece, you have on, wool, some synthetics, whatever it is, so that you're not going to get chilled. Cotton just sucks the heat right off your skin, right off your body, and it can make for a very uncomfortable day. And then, if you're running whitewater on further up on the upper Potomac, or the Shenandoah, I encourage people to bring a throw bag, and learn how to use it. So if you or your, partner, inadvertently capsizes in the river, or you see somebody capsize, having a 50, 75-foot long throw rope in a throw bag, you can quickly heave it out to them and help somebody out from a challenging situation. So I always encourage people to wear PFDs, bring a throw rope.
All right, great. Thank you. Next question is, do you monitor those chemicals, which is probably in reference to something either of you mentioned before, or is it just E. coli?
Well, we're measuring nitrogen and phosphorus. Alan Lehman and I, we just finished putting in our Xylem buoy that provides 24/7 data on the South Fork of the Shenandoah. And after we jump off this call, we'll be putting another one in on the North Fork. We're very interested in nitrogen and phosphorus, oxygen levels. And, people talk about nutrients. I try to avoid using the term nutrients because nutrients is a loaded term that you automatically think it's a good thing. Bodies need nutrients. And we're really talking about excessive nitrogen and excessive phosphorus, and that's two different things. And so we are tracking that. Also on our monitoring systems, we're tracking chlorophyll A and phycocyanin, which is blue-green algae, which is the algae that can release toxins. So we're definitely interested in that, as well as oxygen levels and turbidity and total suspended solids.
Yeah, and on the upper Potomac, as well as down here in the DC area, all the way down to Colonial Beach, I mentioned our water quality monitoring program. We're sampling for E. coli specifically, to let people know when it's safe to use the river and when it's not. But we also do our own investigations of sources of pollution. So when we think like, for example, coal ash, there's a coal ash pond or landfill that's leaking, we will sample, do in-stream for various heavy metals. We recently sampled downriver because of excessive biosolid application. If y'all been reading about PFAS and these forever chemicals in sewage sludge and biosolids, we knew there was a site where there was a lot of dumping and discharging of these biosolids on agricultural land. And so we did sample downriver to see if it was running off into a particular stream. In this case, it was Nominee Creek. and we definitely found levels of PFAS, these forever chemicals, in Nominai Creek. So it can be very targeted when we sample for things like metals or PFAS or contaminants. But the other thing is more about for recreational use, the E. coli, the information you find on Swim Guide.
Thanks, both. Mark, I was wondering if you might be able to send me the links to the Shenandoah songs, the information online in case people are
Sure.
interested.
Yep,
And
I will do that.
great, and I can send that in the follow-up email.
Okay.
So we have one last question. Do either of you have recommendations for how to do river cleanup with a kayak? Should I tow something behind me for the plastics I'm collecting?
I would refrain from towing something behind you. In your kayak, it's easy to snag a branch, a rock, and all of a sudden you're floating down the river and something just yanks you from behind. When we go out on the river, we always bring an extra trash bag with us and try to make it a little bit better than how we found it. Oftentimes, I'm just throwing Coke cans and beer cans and single-use plastics, in the boat and just pulling them out. Um, as we go, and at the end of the day, just collecting them all and taking them to the recycling place. Um, for out here in the Shenandoah, we do, we probably did 65 river cleanups on the Shenandoah water system this spring. We had like 20 different organizations helping us. Most of those, quite honestly, are done from shore. It's just easier to attack things from the shore and not trying to be in a boat, reaching over, grabbing something, and it's much heavier or it's attached to the bottom. And so when it comes time for just collecting your sort of ordinary trash, um, I'm just chucking it in the bottom of my canoe or kayak.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I just think if you're going to really want to do that, learn how to use a canoe. They're a lot more stable. They can hold a lot more trash. If you're going to use a kayak, they are tippy, and you're just limited on the amount of trash that you can put in your kayak. Very, very limited.
Thank you. We did get two more questions. So one is, how can we get the testing for PFAS and sludge done in advance of application by farmers? They need fertilizer and have a hard time not using free sludge, quote unquote, free sludge.
Talk to your
Yeah, we agree
legislators.
with that. Yes. Potomac Riverkeeper Network is taking a real lead on this issue. We tried to get legislation introduced in Maryland. It was shot down by Synagro, the ag company, as well as the wastewater industry. And it's very frustrating, but we were very close to passing legislation in Maryland. Our goal is to pass legislation both in Maryland, Virginia in 2026 that requires testing of PFAS, because we do think it's very unfair to farmers to be receiving. And if you go on our website, we have a report. There was just we got an amazing article in the New York Times covering our investigation that exposed the fact that a lot of PFAS chemicals are being shipped from Maryland sewage treatment plants, and they know that they're in there. They're testing them in Maryland and then sending them to farms in Virginia and putting them on farms and not telling the farmer that these PFAS, that these biosolids, this sludge, is contaminated with forever chemicals. So it's a real concern. It's literally one of our top priorities as an organization to deal with this very important issue, and we agree with that.
All right, next question. Is tetrachloride something you monitor, or is it something no longer used in the state DMV area in agricultural sites? It's part of a fumigant in agro.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's a movement away from tetrachloride. It's used as a grain fumigant, in silos and things of that nature, and it's also used in aerosol propellants and um, dry cleaning and things of that nature. I can't say with any kind of authority whatsoever, um, in terms of how much agriculture is moving away from that. I mean, there are other chemicals that I'm more concerned about, like atrazine, that's an herbicide that's used, and it's highly toxic to to fish and critters living in the water and things like that. But I can't really speak with any kind of knowledge about the specifics on tetrachloride.
Thank you. And it looks like we have one last question. It says, I have been working with Farm Bureau in Virginia to get this done for 8+ years. I am told that the testing is too expensive now. And I believe this was in regard to the last PFAS question. And I think it's more of a statement than a question. But
Well, I guess my response is I don't know why you're working with Farm Bureau. I mean, it's good that somebody's trying to educate them, but uh, in my opinion, they've been an obstacle to a lot of these issues. I think they should be doing more, quite frankly, to representing the farming community and protecting farmers. So I would speak to, as Mark said, to your state lawmaker. I don't care if you live in Maryland or Virginia. Talk to your lawmaker. Tell them we need to start testing biosolids for PFAS and these forever chemicals because it's showing up in everywhere. There's 16 states now that are introducing legislation to protect farmers and start testing for biosolids. States like Oklahoma and Texas. This is a real issue in rural communities and particularly the farms. And we're starting to see, like in Texas, Maine, South Carolina, there was just an article where over 10,000 acres of farmland is being turned into a Superfund site because of the biosolids that were put on there were laden with PFAS. So we need to start protecting our farmers. We need to start testing this stuff. We need to make sure that this is not being, continuously put into our food and onto our crops that's running off and getting into our fish and our food and our waterways.
thanks, Dean. That was the last question. So if you all would like to make any closing remarks.
Just come on out and enjoy the river. I tell people all the time on the River Palooza trips that when you take your daughter or your son out on the river and they catch their very first fish or that they paddle for the very first time, they fall in love with that section of river. At that point, it becomes their river and they take ownership of it and they become very concerned about it. And so I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I encourage everybody to get out and to bring, friends or family that have never been on the river before, but have always been slightly interested, to get them out there. And it's just we're so blessed with having two beautiful rivers in our area. Um, and
Yeah,
get out
I
there.
agree with all that. And, that's why I was trying to debunk, this is why we try to educate people. The bottom line is when you look at the river, recreational use is increasing, right? And DC and Alexandria are revitalizing their waterfronts. 1/4 of DC's tax base is from waterfront revitalization, and it's bringing more people to the river, and there's more people using it. But on the same hand, there's still like some old perceptions, and those are some of the things that we're trying to debunk here. Like there's some people like, I wouldn't even put my toe in the river, and those are some of the things that date back to the 60s and 70s. We've made a lot of progress in cleaning up our waterways, and that's why I was saying that. Like if it hasn't rained in several days or a week or so, and you look at Swim Guide, there's plenty of places in the river you can swim, safely swim. And we want people to do that. We want people to use the river. The only way we're going to save this river and protect it is by having people love it and cherish it and care for it and want to be out on it. And so that's why it's kind of a curse being a river keeper. You're forced to learn about all these issues and threats, and you're actually working to eliminate these pollution sources. And I'm very proud of that work. But at the same time, we're truth tellers and we let people know what's actually happening. But we also want people to use and love the river. So we're kind of stuck in a tough place sometimes, but we definitely want people to get out and use it safely at the right times.
All right. Thanks, Mark and Dean, for your time today. And thank you to all the attendees for joining us for this webinar. And
Thanks,
I hope
everyone.
everyone
Thank
has
you
a good
all.
day.
Have a great day.